It's cup or bust for the New York Rangers, and with a tight cap situation and a bunch of roster spots needed to be filled, what moves can they make this offseason to launch themselves back into position to being contenders for the Stanley Cup? Another edition of the Edgework Offseason Series previews gets underway. We go from one New York team to another. Obviously, we're just going to try to keep those in the same day. We get the Islanders with Mikkola out this morning. And now to cover the New York Rangers, what they're going to do this coming off season today to help us break it all down. Matt Alber doing some fantasy or some work for Underdog Fantasy. Matt, how's it going today?
Good, Zach. How's it going? Obviously, great seeing Lundqvist get into the hall yesterday. Got to rep the jersey here today, so we're ready to get our Chris Drury on and build a Stanley Cup team for next year, hopefully.
Yes, congratulations on your boy getting inducted into the Hall of Fame. That's pretty exciting. That's good stuff. But as you kind of talked to myself or Moretto before we started this, you said, hey, the one thing that Hank was missing was the Stanley Cup. So we're going to put you in the GM shoes here. We're going to give you the opportunity to help build the New York Rangers to be that cup contending team next season. And just like we've done in each of the other videos, we start with the restricted free agents from the New York Rangers, guys who would be on expiring deals here. We'll start there. There's a couple of names that are obviously popping out at people for this Rangers team right away. You look at Alexis Lafreniere as well as Keandre Miller. I'd assume those are the top of your priority list.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously, those two are going to be probably the first two are only two signed off that list. So when you look at Lafreniere, I guess first to start, the Rangers are famous for giving these guys the bridge deals after their entry level deal. Look at what they did with Capo Caco, 2x2.1. What they did with Phillips 2x2.4. Alexis Lafreniere is going to get something in that range, probably a little more. When I look at him, though, it's probably going to be something around the 2x2.5 range, just kind of where they're situated. Obviously, he's kind of in a prove-it stage at this point of his career, so to kind of give him that and see what he does before his next deal, I think makes a lot of sense for both sides. So yeah, 2x2.5 is kind of what I have for Lafreniere. When I look at Keandre Miller, there's been a lot of rumors that he's going to get a longer deal here. You kind of look at what the left side of the Rangers defense is like now and kind of going forward. Ryan Lindgren's going to be an RFA after this year. The third pair we'll get to in a little bit. But I think they want to lock up Keandre Miller a bit longer. I think it's going to be something in the range of 5 years by 5 per, maybe a little more, maybe a little longer. But it'll be something in that range of 5 by 5, and that kind of locks up their top 4D at this point going into next season.
Right, so there you go. There's your two big restricted free agents brought back. He kind of bridged the Alexis Lafreniere deal, but then on the Keandre Miller side, we grab him at 5 years, so extend that one out a little bit. Did you hear something that might be getting you excited about betting on the NHL next season? Maybe you want to get into the futures markets, whether it be conferences or divisions, or you're looking to bet on the Stanley Cup. Well, Pinnacle Sportsbook is the place to do it because Pinnacle is the world's sharpest sportsbook. You can find out what professional bettors have known for decades. Pinnacle is where the best bettors play. You must be 19 plus and in Ontario, not available to customers in the US. So thank you to our sponsor over at Pinnacle. Make sure to go and sign up there. It is the world's sharpest sportsbook. Looking at where the roster's at right now, as it sits, you got 16 players on the roster for your roster size. You've got $4.26 million of cap space, but you're looking at maybe some guys who could potentially make the jump to this big club next season. Who are those guys and where do they fit in here?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the most obvious one is Brennan. People around the Rangers are really excited to see him come up. Obviously, he did great down in juniors. He just won the World Junior Championship this past year. I think there's a very high probability that he starts the year right away in New York. I would have him making the jump. He's going to start on the bottom 6 somewhere. When I mocked these lines out initially, I had him starting on the third line with Phillips. The Rangers obviously kind of have a bit of a log jam on the left wing side, but I have him slotting in somewhere over there. Obviously, with their cap situation, his entry level cap hit also helps them kind of with that. And then the other one I have coming up is Zack Jones. Obviously, when you kind of look at their defense that you have right there, you've Ben Harper in a top 6 spot. that's just not going to be where he ends up. Jones obviously kind of started last year in New York. It never really worked out. Spent most of the year in the AHL. It seems like he's ready to make that jump up. Again, the Rangers could obviously very much use him coming up there, and that pushes Ben Harper down into the seventh D role. So those are the two I see making the jump up. The only other one I kind of see coming up as like an alternate forward spot would be Johnny Brodzinski. He played last year. He was up and down between the Rangers and the Hartford Wolfpack. I think he's the guy that they really seem to like kind of in that extra forward spot. Between him, Jake Leschyshyn, and Will Cooley, those guys kept kind of rotating in that extra spot. So I definitely kind of see Brodzinski coming up there at some point, although I don't really see him making the roster opening night in the starting lineup.
Okay, so leave him out for now, but we do bring up Brennan Othmann, bring up Zach Jones there, so bring up two guys who are going to make the leap to the big club next season, and that puts us in a spot here now. We're at about $2.58 million. You got a roster size of 18. Considering kind of some of the needs here, backup goaltender, looking for some spots on the right side, as well as maybe some extra depth on forward, other than maybe bringing up Brodzinski at some point if he doesn't crack the lineup on opening night. You're going to want to add to this Rangers lineup moving into next season. But in order to do so, you're likely going to have to open up some cap space. Who is going to be the guy on the way out? Is there anything coming back in return? How do you kind of shape that if you're in the GM shoes in the New York Rangers front office going into this next season?
Yeah, for sure. So there's two names that keep coming up that every fan's been waiting to get rid of. Barclay Goodrow and Jacob Trouba. Well, one of them was named captain last year and one of them wasn't. So Jacob Trouba is not going anywhere. They can't afford to keep Barclay Goodrow. Kind of when you look at that cap situation right there, you're at what, 2.6 million. They still need to fill, I think, 4 or 5 spots. The math just doesn't. The thing about Goodrow is that I do think, as bad as his contract is, and the fact that he's definitely on the decline, I think there's a lot of teams out there that would like to have him for what he's able to do still. A lot of those teams that are maybe looking to make a leap into a playoff spot, some of these teams that are kind of in this mode where they have a lot of young players and they need to add someone with his experience and his leadership, like the Rangers were in that spot a couple of years ago. So I actually think, as much as people were like, oh, we'll just attach a pick to Goodrow and see you later, I don't think it's going to cost them as much as some of those other cap dumps that you see. Right. So when I was playing around with it, there were some teams that I looked at that made sense, I think, for Goodrow, but I kept coming back to Detroit. When you kind of look at their roster, I think they had one forward over the age of 27. They definitely have a desperate need in their bottom 6 for some more forwards. So I think that's a pretty natural landing spot for Goodrow. He does have a 15-team no trade, but I don't really see Detroit being one of those teams. When you start to think about, like, okay, if you're Barclay Goodrow, who are the teams that you don't want to go to? It's the teams that are rebuilding. It's the teams that are nowhere near the playoffs. And Detroit's not that. They're definitely in a position where they could make a jump this year. So I do think it makes a lot of sense there. And when I was looking at what it's probably going to take to get rid of his contract, I don't think it's going to take much more than a mid-round pick, honestly. When I did this out, I think I had it swapped, like the Rangers would attach a 4th and get back a 6th, if I'm correct. But I don't think they're actually going to have all that much trouble moving him, assuming that's what Chris Drury opts to do. Right. So yeah, I had Barclay Goodrow with a 4th next year for a 25 6th.
Okay, so we'll throw that in there. Get the 2025 6th-round pick back from Detroit. This will open up a bunch more cap space for us to make a few more moves in free agency here. Now, obviously, taking a guy away from this roster does put us in a position where we're looking at a roster size of 17. There are a few more holes here now, and we have $6.22 million of cap space. So now we can start to move to a position where we can add a few guys and start to fill in some of these depth roles, these depth positions. Let's start here with some of the UFAs who are going to be expiring. I'm interested in your thoughts on whether or not you'd like to bring them back. And obviously there's a couple of guys out there that you go and trade for at the deadline. Patrick Kane, a guy, didn't cost too much, but you do go out and acquire Vladimir Tarasenko. You acquire Mikkola. Both those guys are expiring deals. Of the guys that you went out and acquired at the deadline, is there anyone in there that, A, you would like to bring back, and B, you think you actually can bring back?
Yeah, I think Patrick Kane just doesn't make a lot of sense. I think there is still a lot of teams out there that are going to see what he's done. They're going to know the fact that his hip was just not healthy near the end of last year. And I
Yeah.
think he's going to be able to get maybe not necessarily a lot of term, but I think there are a lot of teams that are contending that will be able to pay him more than the Rangers will. Like you said, they're up against a lot of cap issues. I just don't think it makes a lot of sense as much as, hey, you saw what he was in Chicago right before the deadline when he was turning it on for a couple of weeks. The
Yeah.
Rangers just won't be able to afford him.
Right.
Vladimir Tarasenko, he was a fan favorite from day one. I personally loved the trade when it happened. I know a lot of other people really liked how he was, but I think the direction the Rangers are going again, I think Tarasenko is just going to afford, or he's going to get too much money. I don't think they're really going to be able to get to that number. He's probably going to get what, 4 or 5 million at least over a couple of years. So they're just not going to be able to afford that cap hit.
Right.
The interesting one down there was Mikkola. I really liked him personally. It'd be great to have him back, but we're just in that same boat. They're just not going to be able to afford him, and they have someone at a much cheaper cap hit in Zack Jones that will be able to come up and take that spot.
Right.
So as much as it would be great to kind of bring a couple of those guys back, I just don't think it's realistic going into this year.
Fair enough. Okay, so looking past the guys at the deadline, you do have some expiring contracts from this Rangers team of guys who were here before. Looking specifically at Tyler Mott, Yaroslav Halak is the backup goalie position. Are either of those guys piquing your interest as guys you'd want to bring back and try to be a part of this team next season?
Yeah, absolutely. When I think about Tyler Mott, I mean, everyone always says, "Oh, I had a great time here. I want to be back." But they brought in Mott at the 22 deadline. He was a fan favorite from day one. A lot of people thought they were actually going to bring him back last year when he signed with Ottawa, and then the Rangers go back out and get him again at the deadline again. I think it's a kind of a situation where Mott wants to be in New York. I think the Rangers want him to be here, and he's not going to command so much money that it'll be unrealistic. I do think that they actually end up bringing back Tyler Mott. I think he's kind of realized this is where I want to be. And I think the Rangers are in a position where they can actually give him a little bit of that term that he seems to be looking for without it costing them too much money at this point. So when I did this, I have Mott signing back with the Rangers for 3 years at 1.1.
Okay. So sign Tyler Mott back, 3-year deal, 1.1 AAV hit there. Any interest in Yaroslav Halak at all coming back to this Rangers team?
Again, it's really going to depend on what he's going to make because as we fill this out, they don't have a ton of cap space.
Yeah.
Halak started off obviously really slow, then he kind of picked it up and he became pretty steady for him. 1.5 mil is on the decent side for a backup. When you have Igor Shesterkin, your backup's probably going to play about 25 games. I believe he played 28 last year. I think there's a chance that Halak definitely comes back. There's also a couple other goalies that I was looking back in the same range. There was actually a rumor the other day that they've talked about a contract extension with Halak, so it certainly wouldn't be shocking. But in the end, I don't think that's the direction they end up going because I think he's able to probably get a little bit more money and maybe play some more games elsewhere.
Okay, so that being said, then you're still going to be looking at a position where you need a goaltender. We now have $5.128 million to work with. We've got a few more spots remaining, about 3 more positions that you could probably fill in until we start bringing guys up potentially going forward. Let's start with that backup goalie position. As we did just say, we're going to move on from Yaroslav Halak. Who's the guy in free agency that you're targeting to back up Shesterkin?
Yeah, so the name I keep coming back to is David. Again, when we kind of talk about what the Rangers are going to need in their backup goalie, it's someone who's going to play in the range of 20 to 25 games during the year. But I think they're also in a spot that they know Igor is going to carry them most of the year, so they don't exactly need to break the bank on a backup goaltender. Like,
Right.
if Igor were to go down, it doesn't matter if you signed a goalie at 2.5. Like, your season's over, right? So I think they're kind of at the point where they just want a goalie in here that's able to play 20 to 25 games, be pretty capable, and be cheap. So I keep coming back to Riddick at about the 1 year, 1 million range. I think especially for him, he's kind of in a spot where coming off last year with Winnipeg, he definitely had a better season than he did with Nashville a couple years ago, and even with Calgary before that. He certainly had some moments, but I think that fit makes a lot of sense for both Riddick and the Rangers to kind of get him in year, 1 mil to back up Igor.
Few more spots remaining here in your forward group. As you can see, for those watching on YouTube, if you're listening on podcasts right now to the breakdown, to get the visual of everything, you can head over to the Edgework HQ YouTube channel to see. But Matt, you look at a fourth line center spot. You got two spots open on the right wing. Which one do you target first here, and who are those guys to come in here and fill these final roles?
Yeah, so I think especially when you're buying out Barkley, who was your fourth line center last year into the playoffs, if you're buying him out or not buying him out, if you're trading him, I think that's kind of the position you need to look at next. So I think when you start to look at who's going to be available to fit this spot that won't break the bank for them the way that Goodrow did, the name I keep coming back to is David Kampf. They're going to want someone that can play that fourth line center role, that is able to play a PK role. I think he had one of the most or the highest penalty minutes of any center in the NHL last year. So he certainly is very well accustomed to that role the Rangers would need him to take on. That said, he's good on faceoff, so he's not really a good fit for the Rangers. But that being said, I think Camp makes a lot of sense in that fourth line center spot. I had him for 3 years at 1.8 per.
Okay. So 3 at 1.8, moving on from my team up here in Toronto, but slotting in at the $1.8 million per year. Is there a reason here that you're giving him a little bit more term on the free agency side, just based on a couple of the other signings that we're looking at here for this Rangers team? Some of them are coming in at maybe a little bit lower term, but David Kampf getting 3. Why is that?
Yeah, again, I think when you look at kind of what they'd be giving up in Goodrow was signed for, I think it's another 3 years at this point. So when you're looking at this, I think that when you're Chris Drury, like part of this is you need to be able to sell it. Right? So if you're getting rid of Goodrow here another 3 years, I think you need to say, hey, well, here's how we're filling it. The other aspect is, I think if Camp was looking to get a shorter deal, he could probably command more money. Like I think he could get maybe 2.5, something in that range. And then again, you look at the Rangers kind of cap situation. After next year, they're in a lot of trouble cap wise. So I think they kind of look at it at this point and say, well, we can afford to give a little bit of this term in order to cut the money down a little bit. Because after next year, Capo Caco hits free agency, Ryan Lindgren hits free agency. You don't really have a whole lot of money to play with.
Right.
So I think kind of any chance right now where you see a player that you kind of see being part of this group for the next few years, and you're Chris Drury, I think lowering the cap hit in order to have a little bit more term actually makes a lot of sense.
Okay, sign him in there. Got a couple more spots left to fill here, a little bit more to fill in. Who's the next guy that you go and target in free agency?
Yeah, so when I look at that roster, the other change that I think is probably going to end up happening, I think they're going to end up moving Lafreniere to the Phillips. It makes a lot of sense. It'll let him get into this top 6 role that he really needs to be in to be able to flourish. So the spot I really see that they need to fill at this point is another fourth line winger. The name I keep coming back to is Danton Heinen. So when I look at what the Rangers need to do this offseason after losing to the Devils, it's pretty clear they have to get more team speed. They just got outskated by the Devils for 7 games. It was very clear. I think bringing back Tyler Mott obviously helps with that a little bit. I think bringing in David Kampf for Goodrow helps that a little bit. Danton Heinen's another guy that kind of fits that mold. Obviously coming off a season with Pittsburgh where he had, I believe, 22 points. But again, he's kind of in this fourth line role. It's not somewhere that he's not really used to being in. And I think he kind of does what they need. And you're bringing in fourth liners that can skate. So I think you bring him in there with Tyler Mott and obviously David Kampf on the fourth line. Well, you just took care of a big issue from last year of just not having enough team speed. So that's
Right.
kind of who I see them looking to maybe bring in. It's something like 1 year, $1 million. I don't see this being a very long-term deal. I also think it's very much potentially a position that they look to also fill closer to the deadline. So I think they maybe bring him in here and kind of see how those 3 mesh and then kind of revisit this all at the trade deadline.
Okay, so now we're looking at a roster size 21 here. We've got $1.3 million of cap space. I know we're talking about potentially bringing up Johnny Brodzinski, so we can bring him up here as well. But in terms of the overall lineup, how you see things shaking out, you said you're moving Lafreniere over across there. Let's construct this how you see it line by line. What is your projected roster going into next year now?
Yeah, so the top line that actually worked pretty well early on in last season for a bit was the top line of Kreider's advantage and Kaka. And I actually think that's where they kind of start this year again. Obviously, Kreider and Zibanejad have played together for a number of years now. They've had a bunch of success together. And last year, they tried pretty much everyone else in that top line right wing spot that you can think of, from Kako to Lafreniere. Jimmy Vesey even got some time there. Vitaly Kravtsov got some time there early in the year.
Yeah.
So yeah, I see Kreider's advantage and Kako kind of being that first line that gets attempted there. Panarin and Trocheck obviously played together last year a bunch. It had very mixed results. Like I said, I do see Lafreniere slotting in on that right side. Early on in the season, they actually had a lot of success, kind of went away from it, put the kids back together, put Kravtsov with Panarin for a while. But I think Lafreniere to the right, again, you want to get him top 6 minutes, especially kind of on this new deal. You want to see like if you're going to be able to build around him from years to come when some of these veterans start kind of aging out. So Lafreniere in that second line wing spot, I think makes a lot of sense. The third line, I have Othmann sliding up into that left wing spot, playing along with Hedel and Vesey. I think they want to let him go a little bit, but more so, I think when you look down at their other forwards, I don't think those other forwards are as well kind of fit for that role as they want Othmann to be. And he may be out of his element a little bit to start the year. But again, putting him with someone like Philip Hedel, I think is really going to help him. And Jimmy Vesey was a very pleasant surprise last year. Obviously, they had him on a PTO at the beginning of camp, and then he signed a contract extension during the year. And like I said, a lot of the year he was playing in the top six. So
Yeah.
I think you kind of slide Othmann in along with Hedel and VC to create a nice third line there. And then going down to the fourth, I think it's more likely that you see Mott on the left and Heinen on the right with Camp. But those could really go either way. I know Mott was generally speaking playing the left down the stretch with VC on the right. But that's kind of what I see there. And then again, I see Brodzinski as kind of the extra forward going into the year.
Right. So we'll bring up Brodzinski here, move him up to the big club, putting him in the center position there just as an extra spot. Is there any way that you're going to reshape the defense here? Any rejigging you want to do with the lines in terms of whether that be the depth of it, and you want to move guys up, down, or is there any way you want to pair guys differently here going into next season?
Yeah, so when you listen to the Rangers defenseman talk over the last couple of years, especially after they made Jacob Trouba the captain, you hear Keandre Miller talk about it again and again, how much Trouba helped him acclimate to the NHL. It's no secret Trouba's had his struggles, but I think what would make a lot of sense, especially where you're bringing up someone young like Zach Jones, and you want Braden Schneider to take that next step. I would actually
Right.
flop Schneider and Trouba here. I think they're going to end up putting Schneider with Keandre Miller, and they're going to put Trouba down with Zach Jones. I think Trouba helps to complement a lot of Jones and maybe gives him a little bit more ability to jump up into plays, kind of use his skating, kind of help create offense a little more, which are his strengths. Where I think, and a lot of people call Schneider baby Trouba, I think it's kind of time for him to try to take that next step and jump up there with Keandre Miller. Schneider had a very rough playoffs, but I think coming into this year, it's kind of time to see him take that next step and jump into kind of a top four defenseman role.
Well, there you have it. There's your final roster for the 2023-2024 New York Rangers season. You kind of come in at a roster size of 22, about $566,000 of cap space remaining, leaving just a little bit there to work with. Go moving guys up and down, just swapping things around as the season begins. But Matt, I appreciate you taking the time to build this out. Final question before you go. I can imagine what the answer is going to be, but expectations for the New York Rangers next season.
Cup or bust? Honestly, though,
That's all.
I think so. Here's the thing. I think everyone after the 21-22 season, you see that run of the conference finals that was fraudulent. I mean, we all kind of realize it. Igor had one of the greatest playoffs we'll ever see a goalie have. So I think it was reasonable to expect some regression into last year. It
Mhm.
didn't really show itself during the regular season. I mean, they ended up, I think it was fifth in the entire league. But then you saw them lose in the first round. And then it's like, oh, wow, the sky's falling. Like we went from the conference finals, losing to Tampa, to losing in the first round, not realizing that the Devils were like the third best team in the entire league last year. So I don't really think they may have regressed as much as it seems like on the surface. That said, I'm actually pretty high on them going into this year, being that they are in a position where they can kind of fill their biggest need, which is team speed. They do have some young players they can bring up in Othmann and Jones that should be able to help contribute pretty much right away. So yeah, I think if I'm looking at it, I think they're in that range again. I don't know. They're going to be in the mix of teams that could definitely go far in the East. Obviously, there's a long way to go, but I look at them and I'm optimistic going into this year. Certainly more so than I was into last year.
All right, well, Matt, thank you for taking the time to do this, for building out the roster. I greatly appreciate it. Congratulations to your boy, Henrik Lundqvist, for getting inducted into the Hall of Fame. That's cool stuff there. So hopefully you enjoy that as well. Enjoy the offseason. I'm interested to see how many of these moves come to fruition. We got all the clips and everything, so when stuff happens, we'll be firing that out to say you had it first. Matt Alber had it first on the Edgework show, but thanks for taking the time to do this. Enjoy the offseason and enjoy next season as well.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on, Zack.
Thanks to Matt Alber for joining us here today to break down the New York Rangers 2023-2024 offseason moves, filling out their roster. If you enjoyed the content here today, please make sure to like and subscribe to the Edgework HQ YouTube channel. It takes 2 seconds. Click like, subscribe, and then turn on notifications so you get notified every single time we go live here on this channel, whether it's for picks and predictions or if more videos just like this one come out throughout the rest of the summer. You're not going to want to miss them, so make sure to subscribe, turn on those notifications as well. Let us know in the comments below what you think of Matt's offseason moves, whether or not you agree with the signings, the term, the AAV, as well as some of the trades and the UFAs that he's looking for to help bring the New York Rangers back into Stanley Cup contention.